Welcome to the stash, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a franchise that thankfully has been brought back from the dead. Granted, one thing in the franchise was pretty crappy. 2016 movie, what the hell was that? But for the most part, it has been brought back in a very proper way, whether we're talking about toys, whether we're talking about other movies within the genre. And it's just been a nice to see this resurgence, especially if you were a kid of the late 80s, early 90s, because this was one of the biggest properties of all time for kids growing up within that era. I, of course, am talking about Ghostbusters. Now, when you look at the history of Ghostbusters video games, I mean, that kind of sucked. Like, let's just keep it a buck here. Like, I guess the best retro one would be Ghostbusters 2 for the NES, but not the Activision version, the HAL version that only came out in Japan. I wasn't a huge fan of the way that the Ghostbusters looked. Like, they were like blue. I didn't really understand that, but I think gameplay wise it was pretty good. You know, all the other games never really managed to capture the essence of the Ghostbusters. Even like the 16-bit games, like the one on the Genesis, I don't know, I don't like that game. And I think the reason is because Ghostbusters was never necessarily like about catching ghosts. To me, it was always more so the characters and their interactions and their relationships outside of the Ghostbusters. That's what made these movies special. Like, the ghosts were just the icing on the cake, and like Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Slimer and stuff like that. Like, they were awesome, but they were awesome because of personality traits that the Ghostbusters themselves exhibited. Now, back on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, Ghostbusters came back in a huge way with Ghostbusters, the video game. An absolutely fantastic game. Before we got the proper Ghostbusters film, this was considered by many to be Ghostbusters 3. The script of this game was written by Harold Ramis, and I believe Dan Aykroyd was involved in it as well. All of the original characters were reprising their roles before Harold Ramis passed away, and this was just such a visual treat and a fun Ghostbusters experience that was easily like the third movie. It was more of what you loved, but on a bigger and badder scale. Now, I actually never beat Ghostbusters on the PS3 or the Xbox 360 because for whatever reason, I played a lot of Wii stuff. I don't really know why. I guess I've always kind of been a bit of a Nintendo weirdo, but I played it on the Xbox 360. I played it on the PlayStation 3, but I loved it on the Wii. And let me tell you guys why, because you would be like, why are you playing the crappier version of the game? That makes no sense. Well, growing up, I, of course, watched the Ghostbusters movies, but I didn't own them. I would watch them over at a friend's house or something like that. To me, I was a huge fan of the real Ghostbusters, which of course was the cartoon version of the Ghostbusters characters, and they had different voices. There was different people doing the voices in them, but the characters themselves were still the same. But you got a whole bunch of new characters and new ghosts and stuff from this. There was a toy line that's absolutely amazing that they ended up re-releasing, and I actually own all the re-releases mint on card because I'm a toy YouTuber now. But I loved that style and I loved the cartoon. And instead of just dumbing down the visuals from the PS3 and the Xbox 360 version on the Wii and the PS2, they actually used a more cartoony art style that was more akin to the real Ghostbusters cartoon. So I instantly fell in love with this version of the game. And of course, you could use the Wiimote to sort of use as like your proton pack and your laser in order to suck in the ghosts. Now, it follows a story that takes you to familiar places within the Ghostbusters universe, but it also takes you on a bit of a wild ride, and you go to new locations as well. Like I said, all of the characters have reprised their roles in this game, full with voice acting, and like they're using a cartoony art style, so it's not like them making the facial expressions, it's the cartoon character making it. But they did it so well, and they managed to capture like the essence of the first two Ghostbusters movie by having those moments, by having those big set piece moments. Of course, Bill Murray's character is interested in a woman and he's trying to do stuff to impress her. Stay Puft makes an appearance with a really freaking cool level. The Slimers in the game as well. Like, everyone plays their role and does their role so well. There's so many nods to the original films as well, sprinkled throughout this game, and it's just so much fun. The gameplay on the Wii version, I think, is slightly better than the other versions because of the fact that they have motion controls. Motion controls, when used right, can be a really fun experience. It's not something that you necessarily always want to use in every single game, but when it actually adds to the game or gives you another layer of customization and a sensation of connection with the game and the controller, I think Ghostbusters, the video game on the Wii, was one of the best examples of that. The PS2 version did not feature any sort of motion controls, so I really enjoyed the Wii version of this game. It's not a super long game or anything like that. I want to say it's about a 7 to 8 hour adventure, and I just thoroughly enjoyed this game. Of course, since then, I have purchased the game. The game was remastered, and so it was brought out to modern platforms: PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch. I have the Nintendo Switch version of the game, so I finally got to play through that version as well, the kind of like the original version of the game, and I definitely appreciate the visual style of that because of the fact that, you know, it looks like a freaking movie. Like the Stay Puft in New York or in Times Square scene, that's just so impressive for a game. Like, I think they absolutely nailed it. But I always love the Wii version too. I always like to revisit the Wii version whenever possible, you know, maybe play through it once every year or so, like that, just because I think this is one of the best examples of motion controls and one of the best examples of how to do a port of a Wii game. Instead of trying to just dumb down the original game and, you know, make it look just visually the same but crappier on the Wii, they went in a completely different way. They went with a completely different art style that there was still tons of early or late 80s and early 90s kids who loved this art style because that's what we watched. We watched the real Ghostbusters cartoon, and I think this is one of the finest ports on the Nintendo Wii. It looks great, it plays great, it sounds great, and, you know, no matter what you got, if you have, you know, a PlayStation system or a Switch, you know, play the remastered edition, it's great. But if you get a chance to play a PS2 or a Nintendo Wii version of the game, and if the Wii version has the Wiimote, I think you'll really enjoy it, especially if you grew up watching the cartoon like I did, because I mean, it's just special, man. These are some very fond memories of Ghostbusters and all the things that Ghostbusters did for us growing up. And I'm so happy that the series has gotten back on track, because that 2016 movie, like, I don't know, man. That's what happens when you give the license to someone and you allow them to create something that's just in their vision. It's not in the vision of the fans, and they want to try and bring in new fans, but it ends up biting you on the ass. Did you ever play Ghostbusters, the video game? If not, what are you doing with your life? You need to get your life in order and play Ghostbusters, the video game, whether it's the OG version, the animated version, or the remastered version, because I think I'll be playing it again this Halloween season, because it's just a fun game. And as always, guys, thank you for visiting me here on The Stash. Let me know in the comments down below what games you want to see featured on here, and maybe I'll talk about them. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.